You won. I lost. I win with property and money, and you win even better. In the end, you get a better man. He's in, I'm out. I'm out. The hotel room for the night is all yours. I hope he likes what I've prepared for us and the gift I left you. Please don't try to return it to me. It will be a painful reminder of what a conniving and deceitful woman you really are. I am going home in my car, and under no circumstances do I want to see you, him, or your friends again. Let me know when your entourage is coming for your things. Anything I don't need, I will remove to the garage in black plastic bags, symbolizing the garbage you have turned our marriage into. I'll use my father's phrase when he was told he had to either leave the Air Force or go to Vietnam. Yay me and screw you. I'm done with you. I'm not serving you anymore. Enjoy the trip. You deserve it for being such a good actress. 10 years later, that Wednesday morning, I woke up to the sound of thumping. Wiping my eyes from sleep, I looked at the clock. 8:15 a.m. The banging continued, and I gradually realized it was coming from my front door. Who the hell would be knocking on my door at this hour? Slipping out of bed, I threw on my robe, put on my slippers, and went downstairs, where the knocking became even louder. Looking through the peephole, I saw a disheveled woman on the porch, looking outside. I opened the door, ready to give her a verbal reprimand, and the woman turned to face me. She was about 10 years older than the last time I'd seen her, and it was noticeable. She had lost weight. Her slightly wrinkled face was pale and drained, and gray was showing through in her once beautiful hair. She stank, and her long dress was shabby and ragged. Seeing her on the street or crouched under an overpass, I could easily mistake her for homeless. Daisy. Incredulously, I asked the woman who had once been my wife. Yes, Mike, it's me. Can I come in the house? She asked desperately. By the way, that's me, Mike Carpenter. No, I said, slamming the door in her face. Just then there was another knock on the door, and I heard her sobbing. Please, Mike. Please. I'm begging you. Open the door. I yanked the door open so she wouldn't pound on it, but stood in the doorway to block her way. The neighbors already thought I was odd at best. I didn't need to make a spectacle of myself on the doorstep to draw even more attention to myself. What the hell do you want? I told you 10 years ago that I don't want to see your face again. Never. What part of that didn't you understand? And why the hell are you here? I thought you and Dr. Wonderful lived in Milwaukee. Recovering from my outburst, Daisy wiped the tears from her face and gave me the most wistful look I'd ever seen on a human being. Can I come inside? I'm hungry and tired, and I need to use the restroom. Please? I promise I'll explain later, she pleaded, shifting her feet unsteadily. Having been a teacher for many years, I realized that this was the dance of a person about to shit their pants. The last thing I wanted was for her to urinate on my front porch, so I swung the door open and stepped aside in a reluctant and silent invitation. You know where the bathroom is, I told her reproachfully, since I still lived in the house we once shared. Hurry the screw up. Thanks, Daisy said, stepping inside. She threw her suitcase on the floor and ran to the downstairs bathroom. I closed the door, went upstairs to take a piss, and then came back downstairs. She was still in the bathroom, so I went into the kitchen, started my Keurig coffee maker, and brewed some coffee. By this time, Daisy was back. Can I have a cup of coffee? She pleaded. I stared at her for a moment without saying a word. A huge part of me wanted to kick her ass and then throw her back out onto the street. But I'd never hit a woman before, and I wasn't about to start now, no matter how much I hated her. Besides, it might get me arrested. That would be one way to get money out of me, and I wasn't going to put up with that. Yeah, I hate a woman who begs me for coffee like a street urchin. And for good reason. I can be anything I wanted to be, a bastard, an asshole even. But I'm not an inconsiderate or rude host. And I invited you in. Well, let Daisy into my house. Daisy into my house. So I gave in. if only to watch her suffer and satisfy a lingering curiosity about her circumstances. I don't have any of that foo-foo stuff you used to put in your coffee, I told her. I have milk and sugar if you want it. Black will do, Daisy hummed. Thanks. I set the cup of black coffee in front of her and watched her take it with both hands. I could see her hands shaking as she sipped the hot liquid. Why are you here? I demanded. I have nowhere else to go, she finally said. I spent the last of my money on a cab fare. What happened to the love of your life? I asked sarcastically. Doctor? Bruce? It didn't work out, she stammered, answering without meeting my gaze. Oh, if my sarcasm had been sharper, you could have used it to cut tile. I saw her flinch. No. We got married after the divorce was final. Things were great for a while. But about 5 years later, everything changed. Bruce was sued for medical malpractice in a huge lawsuit that ruined him and eventually both of us, Daisy said, tears running down her face. I don't understand. What do you mean, both of you? I asked. Since I was his nurse at the time, I was included in the lawsuit. We both lost our jobs and eventually our licenses to practice medicine in Wisconsin. We ended up losing everything. Our house, our cars, our life savings, everything. We ended up in a small apartment and for a long time could only find minimum wage jobs. It was hell for us. Then Bruce changed and became physically abusive. He blamed me for our downfall, but it was his own fault. I was just obeying his orders. He became verbally abusive and hit me more than once. He even kicked me right between my legs. And one day I came home from work early in the evening and found him in bed with a young girl who lived in an apartment building. So the cheater got cheated on, I remarked, wryly. I couldn't help myself. Grinning at the irony, I vividly recalled how she and her long-lost lover had humiliated me the night of our 10th anniversary celebration. Karma is real. Imagine that. It's not funny, Daisy whined. I can imagine. Nor was it funny that you and Dr. Shithead publicly destroyed me on the night of our 10th anniversary celebration. You didn't physically abuse me, but you very well could have. It would have been easier. Those wounds heal. It's the emotional and psychological trauma that lasts forever. But you didn't care then, did you? No, I didn't, I added, not giving her a chance to answer. In fact, I continued, do you even realize that today is the 10th anniversary of that very day? No, I didn't realize, Daisy replied quietly. Did you ever report the asshole to the police? I asked, letting my humanity shine through. No, I was too scared. But I divorced him. A former sorority sister, a family law attorney, took me on pro bono. Unfortunately, I had almost nothing left after the divorce. I only had enough for a bus ticket and cab fare. I haven't eaten anything in 2 days. So, what do you want from me? I asked. Sympathy? I'll tell you what. You can find it in the dictionary, somewhere between shit and syphilis. I know you probably hate me, Daisy began, tears streaming down her face, but I interrupted her. Yes, I do hate you. I hate you as much as I once loved you, I growled. You were everything to me, but I was just a substitute for you. A meal ticket until the great guy came back and nothing more. And now that your life has fallen apart, you dare to come crawling back to me. Where are your parents and all your friends? They've all disowned me, cried Daisy. I wonder why, I snorted angrily. Did you and the jerk have children? No, never had any. Turns out Bruce is infertile. For some reason, he blames me for that too, she said bitterly. At least humanity won't have to worry about you two polluting the gene pool, I commented wryly. So something good came out of all that shit. She wrinkled her nose at me. What happened to you, Mike? You used to be so sweet, so compassionate. Anger turned to rage, and I clenched my eyes tight. You want to know what happened to me? Look in the mirror, bitch. You happened to me. Thanks to you, I've lost my ability to love and I don't trust anyone. Period. The good guy finished last, I growled. But I thought you'd find someone else and move on, Daisy wheezed, eyes wide. Get over it. Are you kidding me? After what you've done. You never once let me know that I was nothing more than a backup for you. I thought we had a solid relationship, but you lied to me. 13 goddamn years. 10 of them as husband and wife. Do you really think I can trust anyone after what you did to me? I took a deep breath before continuing. And how many women do you think would line up for a chance with damaged goods after his wife left him like that? Not that I didn't quash any attempt very quickly, I added to myself. Still, there hadn't been a single crusading, beneficent woman in the last 10 years. At least I was numb enough that it didn't hurt. So, are you surprised that after 10 years I've become a reclusive hermit licking my wounds? I guess not, Daisy admitted, bashfully lowering her eyes. And now here you are. What the hell do you want from me? You want me to shelter you and take care of you while you wait for your second great love to come back into your life? Be realistic, bitch. I was hoping you'd let me stay for a while. Until I get back on my feet, she pleaded. There's a homeless shelter downtown, I pointed out. You should go there. That's what it's for. At least that's what I pay taxes for, to keep people like you off the streets. I went there, but they were full, Daisy admitted. I went to the YWCA and even that big church downtown, but there were no seats available. Please, Mike. I'm begging you. I'll do anything you want me to do. I'll cook, clean, and wait on you hand and foot. I wanted to lash out at her with that last comment, but clenched my jaws. She visibly flinched at my stare. What makes you think I'd want to touch you? As far as I'm concerned, you're infected. Walking hazardous waste. I hissed through clenched teeth. And then it hit me. You've been trying to prostitute yourself? She bowed bashfully, tears splashing onto the table as she nodded. How do I look? No one's taken. I looked at her intently, then said, Oh, how far and hard the powerful have fallen. Then maybe I should just leave. Maybe I should just curl up and die in a gutter somewhere, Daisy sobbed. No one wants me anyway. I watched her sobbing and sobbing at the kitchen table, like a dying balloon with its last drops of helium leaking out. I was already thinking about throwing her out into the street to die. My hatred for her was so strong. For 10 long years, I lived that hatred, fantasizing about the most varied and cruel ways to kill her. I had heard of functioning alcoholics. In the case of Daisy and Dr. Asshole, I was probably an acting sociopath. A deep soundproof basement or a stone cellar under a barn in the middle of nowhere where only I could hear them screaming. But to see her here like this after all these years? And then there was Bruce, the piece of shit who'd stolen her from me just to abuse her. I hated him too, but that hatred was growing stronger. I was raised to never use violence against women. In my opinion, anyone who does that deserves what happens to them. I took a deep and very reluctant breath. Look, why don't we eat first? And then we'll keep going. Okay, I suggested. Still sobbing, Daisy looked at me, then nodded her head. Thank you. I'm so hungry, she cried. I'll cook if you want me to. No, it's okay. I've learned to take care of myself over the last 10 years. Besides, this is my kitchen now. You just sit here. I'll make us some scrambled eggs and bacon. Is that okay with you? Perfect, Mike. Thank you so much. I got up, ignoring her, and made scrambled eggs and cheese like Daisy used to make when we were married. Then I fried a full plate of bacon and made toast. Her dim eyes lit up when I brought her a plate. You remembered to put cheese on the eggs, she exclaimed, just like I did before. Thank you. You're welcome, I replied gruffly. Now eat. I set my plate down and began to eat, watching Daisy dig into her food as if she hadn't eaten in a long time. Her face never took her eyes off her plate as she shoved one forkful after another into her mouth, stopping only to grab a piece of bacon or toast. When she was done, she didn't have time to lick the plate clean. How delicious, Mike. Thank you, she said when she was done. You've become quite a good cook. I'm sorry, but I haven't eaten in a while. That's okay. Are you still hungry? I asked. No, thanks. But could I have another cup of coffee? Sure, I said and took her cup. When I returned, she took a sip and set the cup back down. Are you feeling better now? A little. The food has helped a lot. Good. The shower will probably help too, I said. No offense, but you stink. Oh, Daisy said quietly, sinking down in her chair and deflating again. I'm really sorry about that. I've been riding the bus for a few days now. Can I use your shower, please? Please. You know where it is, I said. The towels are where they've always been laid out, I wondered. When you're clean, my robe will hang on the back of the door. Whatever you do, don't put that robe back on. After your shower, you can use the washer and dryer for your clothes. After that, I grumbled that I would have to scrub the bathroom and toilet with bleach. After she slipped into the bathroom with her suitcase, I cleaned and rinsed the dishes and then went upstairs to brush my teeth and get dressed. I thought about what had happened after Daisy announced she was leaving with Bruce, the love of her life, and how it had affected me. We had been together for 13 years, 10 of them married. At the time, I was absolutely devastated. And to make my situation even worse, she casually admitted that she had cheated on me with him repeatedly during those 13 years while he was away and working to create their trouble-free future. And to make matters worse, she was deliberately planning to throw a bombshell at me in public at our anniversary party, and her friends knew it. The situation filled me with even more rage and hatred than I could have anticipated. I should have just ripped my heart out, dropped dead, and saved everyone, including me. A lot of trouble. Things got so bad that the principal of the school where I taught strongly advised me to see a psychologist. I did as he advised, and it helped to some extent. I was able to contain my hatred enough to cope with day-to-day interactions with students and other faculty members. But still, I couldn't get close to anyone, male or female. My counselor suggested that I write an essay to get my innermost feelings out. In her opinion, this way I could banish the hatred and mistrust from my mind. To some extent it worked, and in time I was able to socialize with other people. But I was never able to make a relationship with anyone, never becoming more than a grumpy coworker at work or a prickly neighbor at home. By the time I finished the essay, however, it had turned into a 300-page manuscript. My counselor was so impressed that she suggested I publish it. She even put me in touch with someone she knew in the business. The book was published a year later, and although it never made the New York Times bestseller list, enough copies were sold to provide me with a pension. Of course, I changed the names, but it remained the story of how my wife screwed me over and the pain it caused. Probably just as much help in keeping my sanity was when I started practicing martial arts. Two sensei asked me to quit after I got too hyped in sparring classes. Then, at the community center, I found a twice-divorced retired Marine who took me under his wing. He didn't flinch during sparring when I imagined beating Dr. Asshole to a bloody pulp. However, he had taught me that letting my emotions fight was a sure way to get my ass kicked. Letting my cold, hard brain channel rage into striking power was a skill that took a long time to develop. After all, I could break concrete blocks, but not after getting a legion of bruises. But I never expected to see Daisy again. Never. And I didn't think she'd be in such terrible shape. She didn't look well at all, and I began to wonder if she was suffering from some sort of illness. I also found that most of my anger was now directed at Bruce. My intuition told me to throw her out on the street, but something inside me doubted the rightness of such a move. What if something happened and she died? Would I be able to live with myself? The potential of being in an even worse emotional position than I already was didn't seem appealing. And would I be able to be legally responsible? I decided to get a second opinion and called my mom. Good morning, Mike. Mom said when I answered. This is a pleasant surprise. What's going on? Guess who showed up at my door this morning? I asked, skipping all our usual pleasantries. I won't tell you. Who? She asked curiously. Daisy, I said. I heard my mom sigh. What's wrong? What does she want? Mom asked. I told her what had happened to Daisy and relayed what she had told me. She doesn't look well at all, Mom. My gut tells me I should throw her ass back out on the street, but you wouldn't be able to live with yourself if something happened to her, Mom said, finishing my thought. No, I don't think I could. Besides, she was so abusive to Bruce. I know she hurt you badly, Mom said. But maybe you should listen to what she has to say. I'll tell you this. Why don't I come back later, when I'm done here? I knew Mom could get to the bottom of this and maybe get Daisy to open up more, so I agreed. That's not a bad idea, Mom. I could use your wise counsel. Give me some time and I'll come over. Thanks, Mom. I appreciate it, I said. We finished our conversation and I finished my business. I put on a t-shirt and jeans, my usual summer clothes, and went downstairs. Daisy had already put her clothes in the washing machine and was waiting for me in the living room, dressed in my old robe and slippers. I didn't know if she was wearing anything else, nor did I care. Even though the robe was pulled tightly over her body, I noticed dark stains on her legs. She smelled better, but she didn't look any healthier. Would you like some more coffee? I asked. I'd love some, please, she replied. I poured another cup of coffee and joined her in the living room. She took a sip and I could see that her hands were shaking again. Thank you, she whispered. My clothes are in the washing machine. I'll leave when they're done. There's no need to rush, I told her. I have a few questions I'd like answered, if you don't mind. Sure, Daisy said with relief. It's the least I can do. I suppose. You said Bruce was being sued for malpractice. I thought doctors like him were insured against malpractice. Wasn't he insured against that? He was, but one lawsuit turned into a class action. And then there were allegations of malpractice. As a result, the insurance company denied coverage. Even though it was proven that most of the allegations were untrue, there were too many judgments against him, and the insurance was never reinstated, Daisy explained. Most of the allegations? I asked. You mean some of them were true? Those charges that weren't proven were dropped due to lack of evidence, she said. But by then, the damage had already been done. We were fired and our licenses were revoked. Didn't you two have 401ks? I asked, surprised. Yes, we did. That's what we lived on for a year. We paid a hefty fine for it, but it couldn't be helped. We lost everything. No one would hire us for a long time, and we needed the money. What does Bruce do now? He works as a parking lot attendant. Makes about $16 an hour, Daisy said. I couldn't help but chuckle at that, especially after Daisy talked about how he was going to be a leader in the community. What are your plans? I asked. I thought I might try to find something in the medical field. I may have lost my nursing license, but I can still work in an office, Daisy said quietly. Good luck with that, I told her. How do you plan to get around? Where were you planning to live? I can take the bus or walk, she replied dejectedly. I'll find somewhere to live. It all takes money. I thought you didn't have any. I don't. So you thought I was going to let you stay here and support you until you got back on your feet. Is that right? I asked. I knew it was a risk, but I decided to ask yes, Daisy admitted. I know you don't owe me anything, but I thought maybe since I gave you everything in the divorce, you could show me some kindness. I was so enamored with the bastard that I honestly didn't realize how my stupidity turned out for you. I realize now that coming here expecting something was a mistake. You're right. I don't owe you shit. She looked defeated, but I sighed and added, but I'm not exactly a heartless monster. It's obvious to me that you need help. My mom will be here soon. She'd like to talk to you before I make a decision. Of course, Daisy replied with relief. I always had the best opinion of your mother. And she loved you like the daughter she never had. I replied. And then she added, without knowing why herself, even after everything you did, Mom still loved you. Loved? Asked Daisy in surprise. Yes. That's why you have to be brutally honest with her. Do you understand me? I understand. And I promise I'll be brutally honest with her. And Mike? What? I asked. Thank you for everything, Daisy said very sincerely. Don't thank me yet, I said. At that moment, I heard the doorbell ring. Looking through the peephole, I saw my mom. So I opened the door and let her in with a hug. Daisy. My goodness, girl, has it really been 10 years? My mom asked, seeing Daisy in my old robe. Both women hugged and kissed each other on the cheeks. It's good to see you again, Lorraine, Daisy replied. Mike, dear, why don't you let us girls talk for a while? Asked Mom. I knew this was her way of asking me for privacy, so I retreated to my home office, closing the door. I surfed the web looking for any information about the negligence lawsuit against Dr. Bruce Williams. It took a while, but eventually I found something. From the summary, it appears that Bruce saw about 2,000 patients over 4 years and diagnosed about 97% of them with epilepsy. But it turned out that some children were suffering from seizures, had other medical conditions, or were simply sleep deprived. Compounding the error, Bruce prescribed powerful anti-epileptic drugs fraught with serious side effects and advised patients to undergo unnecessary medical treatments and procedures. And if that wasn't enough, many plaintiffs named Daisy as an accessory. Almost every child who walked through their doors was given a series of tests and diagnosed with epilepsy, whether they had it or not, said one of the plaintiff's attorneys. In some cases, Daisy would tell her parents the bad news and Bruce would agree with her diagnosis. To make matters worse, the hospital had to refund more than $300,000 to the state for improperly billing the Medicaid program. No wonder the hospital fired them, I thought. The state fined both Bruce and Daisy and then revoked their licenses. After more than half an hour, I leaned back in my chair, shaking my head at what I had just read. I had no doubt in my mind that Bruce was the mastermind behind the scheme and Daisy was simply going along with everything he said. I heard a knock on the door and saw Mom show her head. I gestured for her to come in, and she sat down in the chair next to my desk. What's wrong? I asked. I think Daisy needs to see Dr. McGregor as soon as possible, Mom said. The serious look on her face made me sink. Terry McGregor had been our family doctor for many years, and Mom had worked for him until she retired a few years ago. Oh, why? I can't diagnose, but I've seen quite a few women with cancer. I'd bet she has cancer and needs to be seen by a doctor as soon as possible, Mom said. But she wasn't done yet. I know Daisy has burned bridges with you, and I understand that, Mom said. Believe me, I understand it. But if she has health problems, we have to do everything we can for her. It's the right thing to do. She gave me a small, crooked mom smile. I never told you that being a Christian was easy, did I? Besides, Michael James Carpenter, your father and I didn't raise you to be an uncaring asshole, did we? I wrinkled my nose, gave her a small, crooked baby smile and shook my head. So, she continued, I took the trouble to call Dr. McGregor. He's agreed to meet with her today and will run all the preliminary tests for me. If they find anything, they'll refer her to a specialist and help her with her Medicaid forms. She'll change her clothes now, and I'll drive her over. You can't afford that, Mom, I said. Here, let me give you some money. I pulled out $200 bills and held them out to her. Thanks, Mike. You're a good son. Thanks. I wanted to be clear that I'm not doing this for her. I'm doing this because of the way you raised me. And that doesn't mean I forgive her or take her back, I added with determination. I understand, Mom replied quietly. An awkward silence ensued. Did she tell you that bastard Bruce beat her up? I finally asked. Yes, she did. Her completely neutral expression and completely level tone surprised me. I nodded my head curtly in acknowledgement. That bastard should pay for this, I thought. Another awkward silence ensued. Call me if you hear anything, I said. I will, Mom assured me and kissed my forehead before leaving the office. I walked out and saw Daisy in a different dress. It was clean, but just as threadbare as the one she was wearing earlier. Thanks for breakfast, she said meekly. You're welcome, I replied stiffly. I held the door open while they left the house, then closed and locked it when I saw them leave. I grabbed another cup of coffee and headed to my office, where I researched the Bruce and Wisconsin laws regarding spousal abuse. What I found didn't bring me relief. One website said that while the state takes abuse allegations seriously, many cases can only be prosecuted within 3 years of their occurrence. I had no idea how much time had passed since Bruce had attacked Daisy, but my gut told me there was likely little the authorities could do. I was more than cynical. There wasn't much they could take away from him, and if they put him in jail, the state would have to pay for his treatment and 3 squares a day in an overcrowded system. At best, community service. If the state won't punish him for me, I may have to do it myself. But how? Frustrated, I shut down the computer, changed into workout clothes, and went downstairs to punish myself on my new, state-of-the-art stationary bike. I programmed the trainer so that it would take me over rugged mountainous terrain. I focused on the scenery displayed on the widescreen monitor. Daisy wasn't the only one who had changed in the last 10 years. When we'd gotten married, I'd been trim but out of shape. Today I was not only trim but quite fit and liked to work out at least 3 times a week, giving it my best. After my workout, I showered and dressed, which did wonders for my overall mood, and then ate a light lunch while watching the news. It was already 3 in the afternoon when I finally heard my mom's message. I was starting to wonder what happened to you guys, I said as I answered the phone. We'd just finished with Dr. McGregor, Mom replied tiredly. From the tone, I suspected that Daisy was out of hearing range. What have you heard? I asked. He's very worried about Daisy. The tests aren't good. He thinks she might have cervical cancer, but he wants a second opinion from an oncologist. An oncologist? I exclaimed, mentally picturing dollar signs. She filled out forms for Medicaid and emergency state assistance, Mom said. She has an appointment at the cancer center on Friday. Dr. McGregor has already made that appointment. He also said she is eating very poorly and believes she has been physically abused. We know she's been abused, I said, and she told me she hasn't eaten in days. He seems to think it's much worse than that, Mom said and sighed. It's not just the amount of food. It's about him not getting all the vitamins, minerals, and nutrients he needs to stay healthy. I could see she was worried. Look, Mike, it's getting late, so I'm going to take her to get something to eat and then stop by Walmart to pick up a few things. We'll stop by and pick up her suitcase. If you don't mind, I think she should stay at my place. We have a lot to talk about, and I think she'll be more comfortable talking to a woman. I think that would be best, I quickly agreed, glad to have this problem off my shoulders. I'll be here. Thanks for letting me know. I'll call you when we're on the road, Mom said. Love you, son. Love you too, Mom, I replied before ending the call. She called back about 3 hours later to let me know they were on their way. I held the door open as they entered the house. Mom pointed to the study, and we went in there while Daisy gathered her things. Sorry it took so long, Mom started. It's okay, I said. What's going on? We're going to be busy taking care of Daisy for the next couple days. There's a lot to do before her appointment on Friday. I know you don't care for her, but she told me she still loves you and wanted to know. I pulled myself together and shook my head furiously before she could finish her statement. No, Mom. There's no way I'm going back to her. Not even as friends. Not after she lied to me, cheated on me for 13 years, and publicly humiliated me. That's no way to treat someone you love, and I won't go down that path again. I'll be nice to her for you, but that's it. I have nothing left for her. Nor for anyone else, for that matter, I added bitterly. I understand, Mom said. I was just thinking. I know. You thought I could forgive her and start over. That ship sailed 10 years ago. I told her that, but she thinks she can get you back. That's not going to happen, I said firmly. I wondered if delusion was one of the symptoms of cancer. Besides, I'm no longer the same person she left 10 years ago. No, you're not, Mom replied sadly. Honestly, sometimes I miss the old Mike. At least he laughed and smiled once in a while. Can you at least come over for dinner Friday night? I'll cook your favorite meal. Lasagna? I asked, suddenly feeling hopeful. Sure, she replied with a smile. I'll be there, I promised. Your lasagna always makes me smile. We hugged and walked back to the front room where Daisy was waiting with her suitcase. I'll stay with your mom if that's okay with you, Daisy said weakly. That's up to her, I said as my mom threw me that look. Anyway, thanks for breakfast and for listening to me, Daisy said with tears in her eyes. You're welcome, I said with a slight nod. Don't forget about dinner on Friday, my mom reminded me unnecessarily. I'll expect you no later than 6:30. I'll be there, I promise, I told her. I managed to spend the next 2 days doing things. Even though school had gone on summer vacation, I still had a lot to do. I had to work through the new curriculum, approve lesson plans, and so on, as well as the house and yard that needed to be kept in order. I didn't have time to think about Daisy, so I figured she was in good hands anyway. Mom had a knack for getting through the system when everyone else was up against brick walls. At one time, she was the best nurse and medical billing specialist in the state. It was finally Friday, and I left the house after a nice hot shower, stopping for a bottle of wine at my mom's lasagna. I arrived at 6:15 and was met at the door by Daisy, who let me inside, telling me that Mom was busy in the kitchen. It was obvious that Daisy was crying about something, but I didn't comment. Thanks, I said as I walked past her and headed for the kitchen. Mom turned as I walked in, and her face lit up when she saw the bottle of wine. I set the bottle down and gave Mom a hug. We sat down at the table and began to enjoy the lasagna. Daisy looked like she was about to break down. How did it go today? I finally asked. We got Daisy's application approved, Mom said. Thank goodness they have this newfangled internet system. I wish they had one when I retired. I could see she was forcing herself to be upbeat. So Daisy's medical expenses will be covered? I asked with relief. Yes, and the state will pay her a monthly allowance. It's not much, but she won't need much anyway since she'll be living here, Mom said. They're also going to collect the child support Brusos. If they can find him and squeeze the blood out of the turnip, I remarked grimly to myself. That's good, I replied aloud. What about the oncologist? Daisy's face darkened and Mom's expression changed. I knew that whatever news they had, it wasn't going to be good. They confirmed that she has stage 4 cervical cancer, Mom said. And it's spreading rapidly throughout her body. It's already in her extremities. But it can be cured, right? I asked. I wasn't sure how I felt other than discomfort. Maybe, Mom said. She looked at Daisy as if asking permission to say more. Daisy nodded her head, a tear rolling down her cheek. The chances of survival are less than 20%. They can treat her, but there's no guarantee she'll survive. Things would have been different if they had discovered this 3 or 4 years ago. 3 or 4 years. She's had it that long? I asked, wondering. The doctor said they think I've had it for about 4 years, Daisy replied dejectedly. If they had diagnosed it, my chances of survival would be over 90%. Right now, they're about 19%. That sucks. Bruce, notice anything weird? I asked. I forced myself not to say asshole, since I didn't usually swear in front of my mother if I could help it. I don't. He never said anything. Things were really bad at the time, Daisy explained. I noticed some changes, but I figured it was because of the stress we were under at the time. I didn't want Bruce to have anything to worry about. What kind of changes? I asked. It was hurt when we were, doing it, said Daisy. It got so bad that we stopped doing anything for a while. I was glad she didn't elaborate further. Mom quickly stepped into the conversation. They have some new medication they can give her that might help, she said. The doctor said they might increase her chances by 10 or 15%. That's better than nothing. So, what are you going to do? I asked Daisy. I don't have much of a choice. Either fight or lie down and die. And I'm not ready to die yet, said my ex-wife with her former fervor. I've got things I want to should do before I die. I didn't bother to ask what those things were. And how long will this treatment take? I asked my mom. It could take up to a year, she said. Or maybe more. A year, I thought. A lot can happen in a year. Would I be able to last that long? And will Daisy stay here with you the whole time? I asked sternly. I definitely didn't want her in my house. I think it's for the best. I may be retired, but I still remember how to take care of patients. I'll be here with her all the time, and I know who to call in case of an emergency, Mom said. I suppose that makes sense, I reluctantly agreed. Will you be able to handle this arrangement? My mom asked me. I looked at Daisy, mulling over Mom's question. There was a time when I would have been willing to do almost anything for the woman sitting across from me. Then I remembered how she had so unceremoniously dumped me in public for Bruce. Daisy saw the look on my face change. I know you don't trust me, but she stammered. That's the understatement of the year, I said, interrupting her. Let me put it to you this way. If you ever hurt my mother in any way or cause any mischief, so help me God, I will personally throw your ass out on the street, cancer or no cancer. Do you understand? Yes, I understand, Daisy said quietly, and tears came to her eyes. She lowered her eyes, watching the tears roll down her face. I don't think we need to go there, son, Mom said. Let me put the dishes away and get the dessert. I'll help you, I offered, but Mom shooed me away. That won't be necessary, son, she replied wryly. Then she sighed. Besides, I think you two need some alone time right now. Daisy looked at me again as Mom walked away. She wiped her face before she spoke. I started reading your book the other day, she said. It's a good book, by the way. Was I really that awful to you? I have a videotape of that night from different points of view, I replied. You didn't know it, but I hired a videographer to record the party so we could show it to our kids one day. He captured the whole incident. Some of the other guests filmed everything on their phones, too, and gave me their videos after it was over. Oh my God, Daisy moaned, flabbergasted. I watched those videos many times to capture every move and every word spoken that night. It's all in the book. I still have those videos. Do you want to see it? I asked. My tone was light, but I'm sure my facial expression could have made a loaf of bread go moldy. No, that won't be necessary, Daisy said. No wonder you hate me to the core now. After reading this, I don't even like myself very much. I never thought. That's right. You didn't think. Worse, you didn't care, I spat. Every time I close my eyes, I see you and Bruce humiliating me in public, stomping on my heart like a cockroach that needs to be killed. For years, I've fantasized about a million ways to kill you both, and each way has been more brutal and bloody than the last. Daisy began to sob at this revelation, looking at me with horror. But I wasn't done yet. It's all in the book. I started hating everyone after your family and friends gave me shit. They all said I should just get over it and move on and be happy for you. And I said to hell with it. Of course it was easy for them to say that. After all, they weren't the ones who stabbed them in the back and shoved the person they loved more than anything else in the world down the stairs to the septic tank. It got to the point where I hated everyone around me. My principal, Mr. Smith, sent me to a psychologist. And it's a good thing he did. I was on the verge of doing something idiotic. She advised me to write down my feelings, which I did. The result was this book. Yolanda also advised you to start exercising, remember? Asked Mom, returning with the apple pie. She was probably eavesdropping and thought personal space was getting out of hand. Is that why you look so good now? Asked Daisy, hastily wiping her eyes with a napkin and hurrying to change the subject. I've never seen you in this shape before. Thank you. Yes, I have. I've been doing martial arts and signed up for a fitness center. It's helped me a lot. But you're still angry, Daisy remarked. Even after all this time. It's much better now than it used to be, believe me, her mom assured her. 2 years ago, you wouldn't have even walked through the door. At least not on your feet. Maybe on your head. I'm sorry, Mike. I really am. I knew it would hurt, but I didn't realize it would destroy you like this. That's why I gave you everything in the divorce. I thought it would help you move on. When you didn't fight back, I thought you'd be okay, Daisy said. To tell you the truth, my lawyer was shocked when he read your petition. He told me I had to sign it quickly before you changed your mind, I admitted. Have you dated anyone since then? Hesitantly asked Daisy. Not really, I replied curtly. A couple of drunken one-night stands, but that's about it. I don't even remember their names. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my mother's eyebrows rise to the ceiling and a look of utter disgust flash across her face. She bit her tongue to keep from telling me what she thought. I knew I'd find out later, but at that moment, I didn't care. Oh God, Daisy sighed. I don't know what to say. I guess a sorry won't be enough, will it? No, it wouldn't, I agreed sourly. We ate the pie in silence, but I could see the hurt on Daisy's face and I didn't want to look at Mom's face. After we finished, we said goodbye and Mom walked me to the door. I made sure Daisy couldn't hear what I was about to say. Are you sure you're doing the right thing, Mom? I asked. What about her family? Can't they help? I called her parents. They've moved to a nursing home in Florida and refused to talk to her. I got the same response from her sister. Will they do anything to help her? I asked. No. Nothing, Mom said quietly. She doesn't have anyone, Mike. Nothing. What a truly screwed up family, I said, shaking my head. Then I looked at her. Even when I turned into a bitter old rascal, you didn't abandon me. You were there for me when I needed to be scraped off the sidewalk. You and Dad always said family takes care of family. No argument here, Mom replied with tears in her eyes. What are Daisy's chances? Really? I asked seriously. Mom looked back at Daisy before answering. I honestly don't know, Mike. They've made quite a bit of progress since I retired. And although I was a nurse, I've spent the last few years in accounting and administration. Still, I've seen people in better shape than her die, and I've seen people in worse shape survive. There's no way to tell. We'll just have to wait and see. She looked at me, neither hopeful nor angry. A lot of it comes down to wanting to live, to have something to live for. I ignored that. I'm worried about you, Mom. What if she does something behind your back? I know you don't trust her, and I understand. Thank you for your concern, but I don't think it's warranted. She literally has nothing and no one right now. And people who have nothing to lose, I said. Be careful. If you need anything, let me know. I will, Mom promised. But I don't think you have anything to worry about. I hope not, I said. Anyway, thanks for dinner. I'll be in touch. Love you. Love you too, son, she replied, kissing me on the cheek. And please, I know you hate her right now and I understand, but she's nearing the end of her rope. Please try to keep your emotions in check. Don't cut the rope she has left to cling to for her own sake. I'll try, Mom. I sighed heavily, consumed by the dull, universal pain. That's all I ask. And I promise not to play matchmaker. Thank you, I replied and smiled at her before walking away. The next 2 months flew by quickly. I tackled projects I wanted to do around the house when I wasn't preparing for the new class coming to school. Classes were due at the end of August, and I promised myself at least a week off before class. On Fridays, I had dinner at my mom's house. I saw the effects of Daisy's chemotherapy, which was making her weaker and sicker. I thought the treatment was supposed to make the patient better, but apparently that's not how cancer is treated in all cases. By mid-August, she had lost all her hair and was wearing a stylish bamboo chemo cap. My feelings for her didn't change, but I learned to be polite to her, which seemed to make her feel better. It was more for Mom's peace of mind than anything else. Daisy also started getting money deducted from Bruce's paycheck. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Daisy opened a checking account at the local bank, and Mom made sure the money went into it. Daisy insisted that Mom keep some of the money to offset the cost of food and electricity. Eventually, Mom agreed and kept 10%, which she put in a small box. I figured that this money would go to cover funeral expenses if and when that happened. On the Friday before school started, I drove to my mom's house as usual and saw an old, beat-up Toyota parked on the curb in front of her house. I saw the Wisconsin license plates, and I was suddenly overcome with a terrible feeling. I parked in the driveway and walked into the house as usual. Mom was sitting on the couch, and Daisy was lying in a chair covered with a blanket. I heard a noise from the kitchen, then saw Mom's cell phone in her hand, and hoped she had called 911. They both looked scared, and I realized why when Bruce came in from the kitchen with a can of soda and a partially eaten sandwich. The part of my mind I'd learned to keep on a short leash grinned like a wolfhound with a growl that originated deep in my gut. He was still over 6 feet tall, but his once commanding presence was gone. He now looked ungroomed. His hair was uncombed, and his face was covered with 2 days' worth of stubble. He was still trim, but no longer as trim as he had been 10 years ago. Instead of an expensive suit, he was wearing dirty jeans and an equally dirty denim shirt with the collar unbuttoned. Well, if it isn't the asshole teacher, Bruce snorted haughtily. My hatred for this man had reached a critical point. I'd never been in a real fight in my entire life, but I'd learned a lot from sparring martial arts. One of the first things I learned was to avoid fighting if at all possible. Even if you win, the consequences can haunt you for life. What do you want, Bruce? I asked coldly. I want the money that bitch stole from me, he growled. Stole? I was under the impression that your court ordered to provide a percentage of your net income for maintenance, I said. My tone was even, but my eyes were probably snake eyes. The difference is the same. They took my money, and I'm about to be evicted because I can't pay my rent, Bruce hissed. Thanks to her. You had enough money to drive here from Milwaukee, I reasoned. You could have used it to pay the rent. Don't bullshit me, little teacher. Maybe I should just kick your ass like I should have done 10 years ago. That bitch was the only reason I didn't. She insisted that I treat you with respect for taking care of her all those years ago. Why don't you just leave and we'll forget this ever happened? I said, slowly raising my hands, hoping to stop a potentially deadly confrontation. That also set me up for half a dozen blocks and a few neat counterpunches, but he probably didn't realize that. Daisy is sick. She has cancer, and she needs all the help she can get. Cancer, huh? Is that her latest lie? Asked Bruce. He set aside his Coke and sandwich, then reached behind his back. When he brought his hand back, there was a revolver in it. I just so happened to have the cure for that, he added, pointing the weapon in Daisy's direction. Don't do that, Bruce, Mom pleaded, pointing to where she had placed her phone on the side table. The 911 operator was probably listening to the entire conversation. Please. I've already called the police, and they're on their way here. Mike is right. Leave now, and nothing more will be said. I started to move to get between Bruce and Daisy, but he saw me and quickly pointed the gun at me. I could see the desperation in his eyes as he spoke. I forced myself to mentally back off. I hadn't come this far and survived this long to be randomly shot by a cop. Stay where you are, Teach. Don't move a single muscle, Bruce hissed as his hands began to shake. At that moment, we saw flashing red and blue lights through the windows in the front room and heard a voice over the speaker system. Mr. Williams, this is the police. The house is surrounded. We know you have a weapon. Put down your weapon and step outside with your hands in the air, the officer ordered. You better do as they say, I said to a wide-eyed Bruce. How do they know I have a gun? Asked Bruce. I told them. I saw it stuffed in the back of your pants, said Mom. And Mike's right. You better do as they say. This is your last chance, Mr. Williams. Drop the gun and get out of the house, the officer commanded over the speakerphone. Bruce looked around at the three of us and I realized he was starting to get nervous. Our eyes met for a moment and I saw his determination disappear. If you were smart, you would have done what they said, I told him. You won't get a third warning. I heard the back door open and suddenly 2 officers appeared in the room with their pistols at the ready, pointed at Bruce. Drop your weapons, ordered one of the officers. Bruce turned around and his eyes widened as he realized that 2 semi-automatic pistols were pointed at him. Foolishly, he raised his weapon, but the officers fired first. Through the ringing in my ears, I heard Daisy scream and was horrified at what I saw. By then, 2 more officers had entered the room through the front door, responding to the shooting. My mom lunged at Daisy and clutched the pride and joy and time-at-casser she had inherited from her grandmother. I had never been in a situation like this and froze, not knowing what to do. One of the officers saw Daisy and radioed for an ambulance. Another examined my mom and attended to her, applying pressure to the Bruce. I saw one of them shake his head and realized Bruce was dead. I was shaking. Part of me wanted to scream, "The bastard is dead." And the other part of me resented that it had all happened too fast. Mom staggered back and I grabbed her. She clung to me and trembled even more than I did. The other 2 officers were busy administering first aid to Daisy. I was giving my statement to an officer when an ambulance pulled up to the driveway. A detective arrived as well with a team of crime scene investigators. While the detective took statements from me and my mom, one of the paramedics quickly determined that Bruce was dead. While he and the officer placed him in a body bag, the other 2 examined Daisy, placed her on a gurney, and wheeled her to the ambulance. I'm going with her, the mom insisted. However, the paramedics informed her that there was no room in the ambulance and suggested she follow them. You can come with me, I told her. The detective informed us that the house was now a crime scene, so we would have to leave while they worked. He promised to lock up the house before he left and said they might need to talk to us later. Here's the name and number of a good cleaning service, the detective said, handing Mom a business card. She absent-mindedly accepted it, and we got into my car. As we drove to the hospital, my head was spinning. I wanted to deal with Bruce on my own, and I was glad the asshole was dead, even if not by my hand. Strangely, I felt terrible about Daisy being hurt and hoped she would be okay. My emotions were mixed up, to say the least. We made it to the hospital and walked into the emergency room where we were told that Daisy was being wheeled in for surgery. After arguing over the definition of next of kin and my mom showing Daisy's Medicaid paperwork and a form naming my mom as Daisy's medical proxy, the nurse behind the counter escorted us to the waiting area where we sat for several hours. Finally, the doors opened and a doctor approached us. "Mrs. Carpenter?" he asked. "Yes, that's me," Mom replied. "How's Daisy?" "Mrs. Williams is stable and on the mend. I think she'll survive the gunshot wound. The bullet went through her but didn't hit anything vital. She's lucky," the doctor said. "Another inch or 2 more to the left and she wouldn't have survived." "Thank God," Mom sighed. "She's lost a lot of blood and her weakened condition due to the cancer and chemotherapy isn't in her favor. However, we found something else and contacted her oncologist," the doctor added. "Oh, what?" the mom asked. "I know she's undergoing chemotherapy, but we found what looks like traces of infection in her system. I've ordered a series of tests just in case. Oh no, Mom sighed. Is she going to be okay? It's too early to tell. She's under sedation at the moment. We'll keep her here for at least 3 days. Can we see her? Asked Mom. I don't think so. Not until tomorrow morning at the earliest. Let me give you a card. You can call this number anytime to check on her progress and find out which room she will be in, he said as he handed Mom the card. We left the hospital and drove back to Mom's house. We were both silent the whole way, but Mom cried most of the way. I was immersed in my own thoughts. I remembered telling Daisy about how I had fantasized about killing her and Bruce. Now she was lying in the hospital fighting for her life. Surprisingly, I felt a little bad about it and did my best not to think about it. When we got back to her house, I saw that the crime scene tape had been ripped off and was lying in the trash can outside the house. There was a note on the door from the detective saying that the crime scene had been vacated. He had locked it up and given the key to the neighbor. Mom immediately said about cleaning it up. I saw the remains of the chair that Daisy had been sitting on when she was shot and took it to the car to take it to the dump. When I returned, my mom was on her knees, wiping the blood off the floor. Her tears dripping onto the floor watered it almost as much as the bucket and rag. Is there anything I can do to help? I asked after standing silent for a while. Thank you for asking, but no, she replied without looking up. I've cleaned more than that. Would you like to stay at my place tonight? I asked. I knew our mom was strict, but everyone has their boundaries. That won't be necessary, Mom replied, wiping her forehead with her forearm. I'll be fine. Besides, I need to be here in case the hospital calls. I thought about it and shook my head. In that case, I'll stay here. She looked up at me. Her words sounded like, "You don't have to, Mike." But there was a look of gratitude in her face. I know, but I'm going to do it anyway. And if you intend to clean up on your own, I'll be helpful and make something to eat before we head to bed. I mimed a small crooked smile. I hope the wine goes well with the scrambled eggs and bacon. I think we could both use a glass before we try to sleep after a day like today. She looked at me, shook her head, and grinned. We'll see. But I noticed that as she went back to cleaning, she scrambled more vigorously. I worried about nightmares, but either a glass of wine or emotional exhaustion had us sleeping like hibernating bears. In the morning, we fiddled around the house, barely speaking until around 10 o'clock when the phone rang. I went into the kitchen so as not to eavesdrop. 5 minutes later, she joined me and said, Daisy is still in a serious condition, but her condition is stable. She's having a lot of tests done, but she should be back in her room by mid-afternoon. I nodded my head absent-mindedly, trying to see if I felt anything. But other than dazed and confused, I didn't catch anything. Would you mind giving me a ride? She asked, pulling me away from my introspection. No problem, I told her. What time? Can we be there at 2:30? Sure. I'll give you a ride, I told her. I left a little early to take an old chair to the dump, run some errands, and then followed my mom back to her house. From there, we drove to the hospital and got directions to Daisy's room. We went into the hospital gift store and bought a card, a vase of white carnations, which I knew were Daisy's favorite flowers, and an Agatha Christie novel, the same one she had read before she left me for Bruce. Mom looked at me cheerfully as I paid for everything. What? I asked defensively. Oh, nothing, Mom said, shaking her head. I felt my face burn. Don't get any ideas, I told her. Yeah. You really care about her, don't you? Mom asked. No, not really. I just thought it would make her feel better, that's all. I double-checked my change to make sure the cashier hadn't ripped me off. Sure, Mom replied in her typical manner. She patted my hand and said quietly, Mike, the opposite of love is not hate but indifference. When hate dies, a bunch of emotions have nowhere to go. And it's okay that you still feel something worthy of the person you thought she was. And your secret is safe with me. After that, We went to Daisy's room. She was awake, but she looked like a wrung-out towel. Mom kissed her on the cheek and handed her the card we had bought. Her eyes lit up when I showed her the flowers. My favorites. You remembered, she exclaimed in surprise. Her voice was hoarse and weak, but her tone was pleasant. Yes, I said, holding out the novel to her. As I recall, you read it when you left with Bruce, I added without emotion, though my gut twitched slightly. Yes, I did read it. And I never got a chance to finish it. Thank you, she said quietly, not looking at me and leafing through the paperback book. Any news? My mom asked. Not yet, Daisy replied with a shake of her head. She closed the paperback book, but didn't let it out of her hands. Moreover, she snuggled into it like a teddy bear. They said I probably won't hear anything for at least a day. That's fine, Mom agreed. Then the nurse added, how are you feeling? Terrible, Daisy moaned. I'm exhausted, my whole side hurts, and my stomach hurts. They'll sort it all out, her mom reassured her. What about Bruce? Asked Daisy, still not looking at me. He was pronounced dead at the scene, Mom told her. Good, Daisy said firmly, finally showing some strength. I'm glad he's dead. A grim expression appeared on Mom's face, but she didn't say anything. She just patted Daisy's hand and nodded her head. I remained silent as the two women talked. Part of me was glad to hear that my ex-wife had turned against Bruce. Her statement helped defuse the hatred I'd been holding back. But it wasn't enough to turn back the last 10 years. A nurse entered the room and looked at Daisy's vital signs. It's time for you to take your medication, Mrs. Williams, a young woman told Daisy as she handed her a cup of pills. Daisy took the medication and chugged it down with water. How are you feeling? Exhausted, Daisy sighed, and I'd prefer Daisy to Mrs. Williams, if you don't mind. I can't pretend it didn't happen, but I can try to put it behind me. You could hear the weariness in her voice, but she mustered determination for the last part. I'll pass this on to the rest of the staff, the nurse said with a smile. Maybe it's time for you to get some rest, the nurse added. I assumed she was implying that it was time for us to leave. When will we know the results of her tests? Mom asked the nurse. Asked Mom to the nurse. Asked Mom to the nurse. Dr. Samuels is consulting with her oncologist, so they should know something definite by tomorrow morning, replied the nurse. You have our number, and we have yours. We said our goodbyes, and I noticed the wistful look on Daisy's face that she threw at me before leaving. I smiled weakly before closing the door. I dropped my mom off at her house, and then headed home to finish up my weekend chores. The next morning we met in Daisy's room at the hospital. Being a part-time volunteer at the hospital, Mom arrived a couple hours before me. Shortly after me, two doctors entered the room. I met Dr. Samuels, the surgeon who operated on Daisy, and was introduced to Dr. Kincaid, Daisy's oncologist. They tried to look professional and confident, but even I could tell they were worried. So what's the word? I asked, hoping for good news despite their facial expressions. Dr. Kincaid answered first. Ms. Williams is suffering from a combination of peritonitis and diverticulitis, which explains some of the symptoms you've told us about in the past, Mrs. Carpenter. Dr. Samuels took up the report. Our scans have revealed several huge pockets of infection in Daisy's abdomen. In addition, we believe her gallbladder is punctured and will have to be removed. How did this happen? I asked, feeling Mom squeeze my hand tighter. There are probably several reasons, but we believe she had an underlying condition that was exacerbated by the cancer and the medications used in chemotherapy, Dr. Kincaid replied. So what happens now? The mom asked quietly. She will eventually need surgery to remove all the infection and repair the damage. But we'd like her body to recover some more from the surgery she just had. So we're going to leave her here on antibiotics for the next couple weeks and see if the infection diminishes. Of course, the chemotherapy will be suspended during that time, explained Dr. Samuels. What are her chances? I asked, trying to keep my tone even. The doctors looked at each other before answering. I didn't like the expressions on their faces. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, Dr. Samuel said. Without surgery, she doesn't stand a chance. Her body is very delicately balanced right now. Giving her the highest possible doses of antibiotics will likely disrupt her metabolism and weaken her further, possibly even fatally. As far as we can tell, the dose she's on now has stopped the infection from spreading and is gradually pushing it back. But even if she clears up completely, the antibiotics won't repair the damage. There is no open perforation of the bowel wall, otherwise we would be doing high-risk emergency surgery right now. But she was probably on the verge of perforation when we caught her, and the bowel wall is probably perforated in one or more places. Exploratory surgery to try to see what the machines can't show is almost as high risk now. Manipulating the coils of the intestine can literally tear open weakened areas and cause what we are trying to avoid. We need to clean the intestines of infections as much as possible and repair any damage when she is strong enough to tolerate surgery. Then she needs to get even stronger. I won't say she needs a healthy body, but she needs to be healthy enough before we try to fight the cancer again. The malnutrition she suffered from for months has dangerously weakened her entire body. She won't survive chemotherapy unless she clears out the infections and gets her other body systems working properly. Peritonitis on its own is life-threatening, and combined with cancer, he shrugged. The surgery itself is risky, Dr. Kincaid added. Very risky. We estimate that given the level of infection in her abdomen and the damage to her internal organs, her chances of survival are between 30 and 40%. So I have no chance without surgery or less than with it. Is that what you're saying? Asked Daisy soberly. Her eyes were wide open and I could see she was sweating, but her voice was steady. Yes, I'm afraid so, Dr. Kincaid confirmed. However, once you recover from the surgery, you should be able to undergo the chemotherapy without any problems. Then I guess we have no choice but to do the surgery, Daisy said weakly, sinking back onto the bed. Good. We'll make all the necessary arrangements, Dr. Samuel said. They left the room and Daisy burst into tears. Her mom cradled her and comforted her. Don't worry, Daisy. You have the best doctors in the hospital on your side. Everything will be okay, she said as Daisy cried. I had a lot to get through and I couldn't do it here. It was strange. Not long ago, I would have happily celebrated the news of Daisy's passing. But now, my emotions were at breaking point. Look, I have to go. School starts tomorrow, but I'll check in on you from time to time, if you'd like, I offered. Yeah, I'd like that, Mike, Daisy exclaimed. Mom smiled, looking at me. We left the room and I walked Mom to her car and waved to her as she drove out of the house. I kept my promise and visited Daisy several times over the next 2 weeks. We talked about many things. My teaching, my students, my book, her failed marriage to Bruce, and our failed marriage. We also discussed our feelings and everything that had brought us to this point. During one of the visits, I broached the subject of her family. I'm curious about something, I said. What exactly? Asked Daisy. What's going on with your family? Why do they hate you so much? Mom called them, but they apparently want nothing to do with you. Remember when I told you they disowned me after the class action lawsuit was filed against us? Yes, I remember, I replied. What you don't know is that they knew about Bruce from the beginning. They promised to help keep you in the dark, and in return, Bruce promised to help support them when they retired. He even offered to buy my parents' cruise tickets when they retired. And you and your sister knew about all this? I asked, my anger starting to build. Daisy lowered her eyes in embarrassment. Yes, she whispered before looking at me again. It was another knife in the back, I know. And I'm so terribly sorry. So your family used you and Bruce the same way you used me, I remarked. So your family used you and Bruce the same way you used me, I remarked. My tone wasn't cold, it was icy. She wrinkled her nose and just looked miserable. I controlled myself. If you don't want an answer, don't ask the question. Mostly, Daisy admitted sorrowfully, things went downhill when we got sued. After we lost everything, my family wanted nothing to do with me. That explained the way they treated me after you left, I told her. It also explained how Daisy thought it was okay to use me while she waited for Bruce. Everyone had the upper hand except me. It also reinforced my belief that there was no way I could ever make up with her, not after everything she'd done. Daisy realized this too, and made no effort to rekindle what I thought we once had. But we did manage to make up, and I saw sparks. Flashes of the woman I had fallen in love with several times. In the process, I found that my hatred for her and Bruce diminished considerably. After his death, my hatred for Bruce faded a bit as well, though I still hoped that he would face severe eternal punishment for all he had done, and not just to me and Daisy. Mr. Smith allowed me to take the day off for Daisy's surgery and arranged for a substitute teacher. I arrived at the hospital early in the morning and talked to her before she was wheeled into the operating room. I was unaccountably worried, but tried my best not to show it. I know I've said a lot of nasty and hateful things since you've been back, I said. And I just want to apologize for that. I really hope you can get through all of this. Part of me was surprised that I didn't have to pretend to be sincere. Thank you, Mike. That means a lot to me, Daisy replied with a weak smile. I deserved everything you said, so I accept your apology. And I want to apologize for destroying the best man I've ever known. I know it's too late for us, but I do love you. You put up with me when you had no reason to. She took a deep breath. Please promise me something. What? I asked. Whatever happens, I want you to find someone you love. You deserve it, she said sincerely. That surprised me. She continued to look at me so intently that I finally said, I promise I'll try. She nodded slightly, as if giving herself a little absolution. We need to get her to the operating room, sir, the orderly said politely. Of course, I said. Just a minute. Completely spontaneously, I leaned over and kissed Daisy on the cheek. You can do that, I said as she smiled back. I froze in bewilderment. For a moment, she looked exactly as I remembered her on our wedding day. Some deeply hidden part of me wondered if there were times when she really loved me, and I wasn't just a provider for her. I stood up, a little dizzy, and the orderly wheeled her gurney out of the room. That was really nice, Mike, Mom said softly, as we followed the orderly into the operating room. She was wheeled inside, and we sat down in the waiting room. We sat there for several hours while the surgery went on. I tried to watch the TV hanging on the wall, but I couldn't concentrate on what was being said. All I could think about were the events of the last 10 years. My mind endlessly replayed everything over and over again. While my mom worked on her latest Afghan, I paced back and forth, drinking one cup of crappy coffee from the machine after another. I was caught in an endless loop, reliving the last few months all over again. 6 hours later, Dr. Samuels walked out of the operating room. The look on his face I immediately didn't like. He approached us and asked us to join him in a small room. After closing the door behind us, he sat down at a small table across from us, rubbed his eyes, and sighed heavily. I thought he was going to burst into tears. Mom squeezed my hand so hard my fingers ached, and I knew what he was going to say before he even said it. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Carpenter, Mr. Carpenter. We did everything we could for Daisy. There was just too much infection and damage to her internal organs, he said sadly. Her body just shut down. She signed a DNR in a form donating her body to cancer research if she didn't survive. Her heart stopped, and we did everything we could ethically, but we were never able to get it started. Again, I'm sorry for your loss. Mom immediately burst into tears, and I felt a tear about to burst from my eye, but I refused to shed it. I hugged my mom as she sobbed and nodded to the doctor. Thank you for everything you've done, I told him. We shook hands and I saw a tear leak out of his eye. When Mom calmed down, we walked back to Daisy's room in a near trance-like state. We didn't say anything as we packed her things. There was no need to say anything. I found a small envelope labeled Mike in Daisy's handwriting in the drawer of her bedside table. I opened the envelope and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Daisy had written a note in case she didn't survive the surgery. Mike, the letter began. You will only see this in case I don't survive. Thank you for being there for me the last 2 months, especially the last 2 weeks. You don't owe me anything, but you and your mother were there for me when everyone else abandoned me. I know what I did to you 10 years ago is unforgivable, and I'm terribly sorry I hurt you. I want you to know that even after all this time, a huge part of me still loves you, and I'm sorry for what my infatuation with Bruce has put me through. I know you'll never feel the same way about me, and I understand you. I can only hope that through my death, you will finally find peace. Love, Daisy, the note ended. I began to shiver as I looked at the words on the paper. I saw the water droplets hit the note, and I realized I was crying. I felt my mom's hand on my shoulder. What's wrong, son? She asked. It was like a dam burst inside me, and I cried hot, bitter tears as I showed my mom the note. It was the first time I had cried since Dad had died 6 years ago. Mom started crying again after reading Daisy's note, and we ended up crying together, hugging each other. I realized something else when we calmed down enough to finish packing Daisy's things. All the anger, hatred, and bitterness I'd carried inside me for 10 years was gone. Completely. For the first time in 10 years, I felt calm. It was as if my hatred had died with Daisy, as if I'd gotten lost in a dark and barren maze, and her death had caused part of the wall to crumble and opened a way out for me. Strangely, her death healed me. We finished packing her things, signed the papers, and left the hospital in a daze. I followed my mom to her house and helped get Daisy's things inside. We had a gloomy dinner of leftovers, barely saying anything to each other. After I helped her put the dishes away, she left to go to her room, and when she came back, she held something out to me. I looked at what she gave me, a small picture of a smiling Daisy in her mom's chair. It had been taken shortly after the chemotherapy started. I just thought you might like something to remember her by, Mom said. Thanks, I said, hugging her. By the way, do you want to call her family or me? Would you mind doing that? She asked. I talked to them once, and that was all I could handle. Sure, I said. I'll call as soon as I get home. Mom handed me a slip of paper with a number on it, which I put in my pocket. We hugged one more time, and I left. Back home, I called Daisy's parents. Her father answered after the second ring. Fred, it's Mike Carpenter, I said. What do you want? He asked angrily. As I considered my words, I wondered what had gotten into his underpants. After all, I wasn't the one who'd turned down financial support and a retirement cruise. Your daughter Daisy died in surgery today, I said. I don't have a daughter named Daisy, Fred grumbled. Not anymore, you don't. Why are you calling? I just thought you might be interested to know. So, what do you want from me? Asked Fred. Do you want us to demand a body or something? No. She donated her body to cancer research, I said, barely restraining myself. Well, at least her life wasn't wasted, he growled. Don't call here again. I heard him curse before ending the call. I felt like calling back and ripping him to shreds, but I decided that would be a waste of time. Sighing, I called my principal at home and told him the news. I'm sorry to hear that, Mike, he said. How are you holding up? I've gotten better, I said. But I'll be fine. Look, why don't you take the rest of the week off, and I'll put it down as paid parental leave. I'll find a replacement. Thanks, I really appreciate it, I said. We finished talking and I grabbed a beer from the fridge. I opened the bottle and took a long look at the picture my mom had given me. Here's to you, kid, I said, and took a big sip. Epilogue, the following June. I've never been comfortable in a cemetery, which is probably to be expected. The endless reminders of mortality can be depressing to someone with an ordinary imagination. I parked my car on the center path under the broad branches of an ancient maple tree and walked. The sun was shining brightly on the cemetery's main road, but as I drove into the ornate wrought iron gates, everything turned a kind of gray. It was one of those mysteries of life. I found the monument pretty quickly. It was small, but much newer and cleaner than the surrounding stones. I sighed as I looked at it. I remembered the way my mom had looked at me when I filled out the form at the monument company. I didn't want to bury her under the last name Williams because I was sure my ex-wife would come back to haunt me. But the cemetery administration insisted on using the name Williams because that was what was listed on Daisy's death certificate. So that's the name that was used. So far, no ghosts have appeared. There was a small bronze flower tube next to the monument, and I placed the white carnation I had brought with me in it. The grass in the small plot was still no more than green fluff, and the soft earth had not yet had time to settle. When it was over, the medical school cremated Daisy's remains and returned them in a simple urn with a letter of thanks. Mom and I decided to bury her rather than scatter her ashes after almost an entire bottle of wine, a few tears, and a few laughs. Bruce was buried in a neglected and unkept far corner of the lot under a small concrete block topped with a bronze tag with a single serial number. A pauper's grave. I'd only visited it once just after Daisy died. I poured a bottle of urine on the ground right where I calculated his face should have been. If anyone saw me urinating on him, I might have to explain myself. After a few minutes of silent reflection, I muttered my goodbye. I had shed all the tears last week when Mom and I were the only ones present at her burial despite turning to Daisy's family and so-called friends. I guess I figured that if jolting Joe DiMaggio could take Marilyn's body after her divorce and lay flowers at it for 20 years, I could bury Daisy and leave carnations for her from time to time. The grayness around me disappeared and I felt, not sad or happy, but like a clean blackboard waiting to be written on. As I walked back to my car, I noticed two more mourners a few rows away from me. One is a woman in a black dress, conservative, neat and tidy and clean but somber. She had braided her long blonde hair into a braid that reached to her waist. A small, shivering boy in jeans and a loose camouflage jacket clung to her. His hair was short and dark. I don't know why, and the last thing I wanted to do was intrude on personal grief. But I walked up behind them and looked at the sign. Ryan G. Englert, Sergeant, USMC. September 9th, 1990. September 10th, 2022. Husband, father, Marine. He will be greatly missed. I saw the silver star and purple heart symbols. The woman looked at me fearfully. She had the bluest eyes I'd ever seen. I'm sorry, I muttered. I didn't mean to intrude. Before she could say anything, the little boy looked up and said, I miss him so much. His eyes were even bluer than his mother's, and I didn't know if he was stating a fact, seeking comfort, or crying out for help. He must have been a handsome man if he resembled his father. I knelt down and rummaged in my pocket. I pulled out a notepad and pen, which I used far more often than the note function on my phone, and held them out to him. Here, son. Write him a note and tell him about it. You can roll it up real tight and put it in that crack in the ground next to the marker. I'm sure he'll get it. He hugged me and took the notebook and pen and started writing. I stood up and his mother looked at me with tender and sincere gratitude. At that moment, I heard two quiet but distinct chuckles, a female and a male, one in each ear. Then the female voice whispered, keep your promise. I got the distinct feeling that June would